By 1972, America was supposed to be done with Vietnam. At least that was the pitch. The politicians called it Vietnamization. The South Vietnamese would do the fighting, and the U.S. forces would step back into more of a support role. Ground troops were going home by the tens of thousands, and the White House wanted Americans to believe the war was winding down. But wars don't care about speeches. Wars don't wait for clean exit strategies. And the North Vietnamese weren't politely agreeing to stop just because Washington was tired of the fight. In March of that year, they launched the Easter Offensive, the largest coordinated invasion of the entire conflict. Forget guerrillas popping out of tunnels. This was a full-scale conventional assault, tanks and artillery rolling south in waves. For a brief, bloody window, it actually looked like Saigon itself might collapse. The American combat role may have been reduced, but that didn't mean there weren't still plenty of Americans fighting and dying. The skies over South Vietnam were packed with U.S. aircraft. B-52s ran bombing missions, Phantom jets flew close air support, reconnaissance planes prowled for targets. It was dangerous work, and if you went down, there was a good chance you weren't coming back. And that brings us to Quang Tri Province, April 1972. This stretch of territory was as bad as it got. The northernmost province of South Vietnam, Quang Tri was practically a speed bump for the North Vietnamese Army's armored columns pouring across the DMZ. Anti-aircraft guns were everywhere. SAM batteries bristled along the invasion routes, and the jungle floor below was crawling with thousands of troops who were very motivated to make sure any American unlucky enough to fall from the sky stayed put. Into this nightmare flew Lieutenant Colonel Icil Gene Hambleton. He wasn't just any pilot. He was an electronic warfare officer with access to some of America's most sensitive technology. The kind of guy who, if captured, might spill secrets that could compromise entire operations. When his EB-66 destroyer was ripped apart by a SAM, Hambleton parachuted down into one of the most dangerous places on Earth. His chute hadn't even hit the ground before the rescue machine spun up. The United States had one of the most aggressive, leave no man behind doctrines of any military on the planet, and for good reason. Vietnamese propaganda loved nothing more than parading captured airmen in front of cameras. On top of that, Hambleton wasn't just a warm body in uniform. He was loaded with critical knowledge of electronic countermeasures and the top-secret Wild Weasel missions that suppressed enemy air defenses. Leaving him behind wasn't an option. So the Air Force did what it always did when a pilot went down. It launched rescue missions. But here's the thing about Vietnam. Every simple rescue had a way of turning into a bloodbath. For Hambleton, the bloodbath was immediate. Within hours, helicopters tried to get in, only to be chewed apart by ground fire. More planes followed. By the time the brass finally admitted it wasn't working, 5 aircraft had been shot down and at least 11 men were dead or missing. Hambleton alone in the jungle was sending out desperate radio calls. It was the biggest, costliest rescue attempt of the war, and it was failing. And here's the irony. At this point in the war, when public opinion was collapsing and the Pentagon was trying to pull out as cleanly as possible, the U.S. military found itself risking everything for one man. One pilot, yes, but a pilot with the wrong secrets in his head. Hambleton had been told to move south toward friendly lines, but friendly was a relative term. Quang Tri was almost completely overrun. For him to survive, he needed to evade thousands of enemy soldiers, while rescue aircraft kept getting blown out of the sky above him. The window was closing fast. That's when the job landed on the desk of the U.S. Navy SEALs. Now, SEALs had been in Vietnam for years, running riverine raids, ambushes, and reconnaissance. They were specialists in doing the impossible with the minimum. But the task now wasn't hitting a weapons cache or snatching a prisoner. It was retrieving a man in the middle of enemy territory that had already claimed multiple aircraft and crews. If anyone was going to get Hambleton out alive, it would have to be a team that could move invisibly, think creatively, and keep their cool under insane pressure. The man who stepped forward was Lieutenant Thomas R. Norris. At that moment, Norris wasn't a household name. He wasn't even a name most SEALs outside of his unit knew particularly well. He was quiet, calm, and more likely to be found studying maps and bragging at a bar. But sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who get tapped for the loudest jobs. And Norris's job was about to get very, very loud. Thomas Norris wasn't supposed to be a Navy SEAL. He wasn't accepted into Annapolis, wasn't a Golden Boy candidate. He got in the hard way. Degree from Maryland, commissioned through Officer Candidate School, and then straight into the fire of basic underwater demolition SEAL training. BUD/S is famous for breaking men, and in 1969, Norris was one of the few who walked out the other side. He wasn't the loudest or the strongest, but he was steady, the kind of man who kept moving when everyone else stopped. By 1972, Norris had already carved out his place in the teams. SEALs in Vietnam worked in shadows, small units with South Vietnamese commandos, sliding down rivers at night, vanishing before dawn. No front lines, no glory, just patience and violence when it counted. Norris wasn't flashy, and he didn't chase attention. He listened, planned, and then got the job done. That style made him almost invisible, but it also made him exactly the kind of operator this war suddenly needed. Because Hamilton's rescue wasn't going to be solved with more helicopters and airstrikes. The U.S. had already lost aircraft and men trying to brute force it. The only way left was quiet, clever, and nearly impossible. And that was Thomas Norris's specialty. April 2nd, 1972, Lieutenant Colonel ISEAL Gene Hamilton was flying his EB-66 electronic warfare aircraft over Quang Tri Province when the sky lit up. North Vietnam's Easter offensive was in full swing, tanks, artillery, infantry pouring south, and the airspace above it was one of the deadliest anywhere. Hamilton's plane didn't stand a chance. A surface-to-air missile slammed into it and the crew bailed out. Hamilton drifted down into the middle of enemy-held territory. On paper, he was just another downed flyer. In reality, he was one of the worst possible men to lose. He wasn't a random pilot. He was an electronic warfare officer with access to highly classified countermeasures and mission details. If the North Vietnamese got their hands on him, they wouldn't just have a propaganda trophy. They'd have a gold mine of intelligence. The Air Force knew it. Within hours, rescue attempts were launched, but Quang Tri wasn't friendly ground. It was crawling with NVA troops, and they weren't about to let Americans pluck a prize like Hamilton out from under their noses. Helicopters flew in first. They didn't make it far. Anti-aircraft fire chewed them up, forcing some to crash, others to limp home trailing smoke. Fixed-wing aircraft tried to cover them, only to be knocked down themselves. Within a few days, the tally was brutal. 5 aircraft lost, more than a dozen airmen killed or missing. What should have been a quick pickup had turned into the costliest rescue attempt of the war. And still, Hamilton was alone in the jungle, evading capture, radioing out fragments of his position while enemy patrols closed in. Every time he moved, he risked being spotted. Every time he stayed still, he risked being surrounded. For 11 days, he survived like this, while Americans bled trying to reach him. The brass faced an ugly truth. Air power wasn't going to solve this one. They had thrown everything they had at the problem. Gunships, jets, helicopters, and all it had brought them was wreckage and funerals. If Hamilton was going to be pulled out alive, someone was going to have to go in the old-fashioned way, on the ground, in the mud. That narrowed the list of candidates fast. Conventional infantry couldn't sneak in without a firefight. Special forces were tied up elsewhere. What the mission needed was someone who could move like a shadow, slip through the enemy positions, and bring Hamilton out without a small war exploding around him. That's when the job landed on the lap of the Navy SEALs. And among them, one officer, quiet, unassuming, and utterly dependable, stepped forward: Thomas Norris. Lieutenant Thomas R. Norris was already operating in-country with South Vietnamese commandos when the call came. The mission was simple to describe, but nearly impossible to execute. Infiltrate by night, move like ghosts, use disguises by day, and somehow slip a half-dead American officer out from under the enemy's nose. Most men would have looked at that description and politely declined. Norris didn't make a speech or a show of bravado. He just accepted. He wasn't going in alone. His partners were a small team of South Vietnamese Sea Commandos, local operators who had fought beside the SEALs for years. These men knew the rivers, the villages, the terrain. If anyone could make a sampan look like a fisherman's boat instead of an infiltration craft, it was them. Norris trusted them completely, and they trusted him in return. The plan was stitched together from scraps. They would use the rivers as highways, hiding in plain sight by posing as locals. At night, they would move. By day, they'd melt into the reeds or act like ordinary peasants. No helicopters, no fire support, just stealth, patience, and luck. The risk was obvious. Quang Tri was crawling with NVA patrols. Every river bend had eyes. Every trail was watched. If they were caught, they wouldn't be taken prisoner. The North Vietnamese had already executed captured South Vietnamese commandos on the spot. The same fate likely waited for Norris. Still, he pressed forward. Before they could even think about Hamilton, another complication hit. Another American pilot had gone down. Lieutenant Mark Clark had been shot down during one of the botched rescue attempts. Now there were two downed airmen to worry about. Norris had a choice: wait, regroup, or strike immediately. He chose the last. Clark was alive, on the run, and the longer they waited, the smaller his chances. So Norris and his Vietnamese team prepped their first infiltration. The mission was already shifting, already harder, and Norris hadn't even reached his original target. But this was exactly why he was the right man. Calm under pressure, steady when everything around him fell apart. The Quiet Seal was about to step into the loudest, most dangerous mission of his life, and he wasn't backing down. Night ate the river like a mouth. The sampan slid forward with barely a whisper, its motor idling low, reeds scraping along the gunnels. Above them, the sky was a flat, hungry black. The only light was a pinprick radio glow and the occasional flash where artillery talked to the horizon in distant bursts. Every inch of Quang Tri felt watched, because it was. Norris sat low, wrapped in a poncho, listening to the soft, efficient breathing of the South Vietnamese commandos beside him. These were men who'd navigated these waterways a dozen ways in a dozen deadlier nights. They moved like fishermen, bodies trained to be shadows, faces practiced into calm. Norris had trusted them before. Tonight, trust was a currency that would buy lives. The new objective was blunt and immediate. Lieutenant Mark Clark had gone down while searching for Hamilton. Clark was alive but exposed. The longer he stayed out there, the worse his chances. The SEALs could wait and plan until they were perfect, until the pilot was dead, or they could act now. They acted. The insertion was surgical. By Moonless River, rows of sampans slipped past patrols and thickets. At certain bends, the commandos would kill the motor and drift. Norris and two Vietnamese swimmers would slip from the boat, waterproof gear hugging them, and wade through chest-deep reeds until the muddy shore took them. They moved on hands and knees across slick rice paddies, burying sound in the wet ground. At times, they crawled close enough to hear voices on the riverbank, laughing, cursing, and casual noises of men who didn't know someone might be watching their toes. The key was blending. When daylight came, they were peasants with bamboo poles. When darkness came, they were hunters with teeth. They used local clothes, mimicked dialects, and moved the way river people did. It was the kind of deception that could not be faked without practice, so they practiced. Close calls came fast. Twice a patrol drifted within pistol range of their hide. Once an enemy flashlight swept their patch of reeds. For a full minute, Norris could feel his heart banging in the hollow of his throat. The commandos held him down. Silence is a physical discipline. It feels like a muscle that cramps under stress. They kept it together. At dawn, they found Clark. He was thinner, ragged, but alive, shivering from exposure, wounded in a way that left him weak rather than bleeding. He'd been hiding in a stand of flooded bamboo, moving only at night, and surviving on whatever he could find. Seeing another uniform had a way of cracking a man open with relief. Clark's voice was hoarse, his eyes wet and feral with gratitude. Extraction demanded speed and improvisation. They could not call in a helicopter. The sky was a death trap. They could not march him across country. The roads were crawling with the enemy. So they did what they always did, turn the river into a road and make the boat a place no one suspected. Clark was wrapped in oilcloth to keep him dry and silent. Norris and two commandos eased him into the bottom of the sampan, cushioning him with seagrass and blankets scavenged from a nearby village. The motor was restarted on a low hum. For 2 days they would inch south, hugging the far shore, moving through reed-choked cutoffs with blind canals while lookout men scanned the banks for signs of troops or ambush. On several occasions, shells punched the horizon with the polite stutter of artillery. One patrol boat flashed searchlights in a wide sweep. They flattened themselves and held breath until the sweep had passed. Men on the boats muttered and cursed and argued in Vietnamese about nuts and chickens. They couldn't have known their prize sat 2 feet away under a blanket. Camouflage, cunning, and a steady set of hands carried them through where bullets and helicopters hadn't. When they finally reached a safe staging area, an improvised landing near friendly lines, Clark's knees wobbled as he stepped onto solid ground. He turned and mouthed, "Thank you," in a voice small enough not to carry. It was one of the few times Norris allowed any visible emotion. A tiny nod, a corner of the mouth that might have been a smile. That night's success mattered for reasons beyond one saved man. It proved the method. River infiltration, disguise, patient stalking. It worked. It showed that the brute force approach of more aircraft and louder explosions had been the problem, not the solution. Norris's team had done what the big machines could not: go low, go quiet, and get a man home. But the wind carried no rest. Clark's rescue solved one emergency, but it also sharpened the focus on the original prize. Hamilton was still out there, deeper, longer, and more dangerous to reach. Every success made the brass hungry to press the advantage and made the enemy more watchful. Norris knew the next run would be riskier by measure and by consequence. They had proven the concept. Now they had to scale it up. And this time the stakes were higher than any of them had yet imagined. Mark Clark was safe, but the job wasn't done. The original target, Lieutenant Colonel Gene Hamilton, was still out there, 11 days on the run, clinging to life in the middle of the biggest North Vietnamese offensive of the war. Every day he survived was a miracle, but miracles expire. If anyone was going to reach him, it had to be now. Command could have called it quits. They'd already lost men, machines, and pride trying to get him. But Hamilton wasn't just another pilot. He carried classified knowledge that could compromise entire operations if captured. He was too valuable to abandon. The brass needed someone crazy enough or calm enough to try again. Norris didn't hesitate. He pressed to go back. If Clark could be pulled out by stealth, so could Hamilton. It would just be longer, harder, and deadlier. This time the disguise would be everything. Norris and his South Vietnamese commandos, dressed as fishermen, slipping into the same waterways that had already claimed helicopters and gunships. Their cover story was simple: peasants moving supplies. Their reality was far more fragile. One wrong word, one bad glance, and they would all be executed on the spot. The journey upriver was a study in controlled fear. By day, they floated past checkpoints, motoring slowly, pretending to be bored with the monotony of hauling nets. Enemy troops stared from the banks. Patrol boats cut across the water, soldiers with rifles resting casually on the rails. Every time a searchlight swept the boat, Norris's heart pounded. Every time it passed without stopping, the commandos exhaled in unison like they'd been holding the same breath. By night, they dropped the act and moved like predators. The motor cut to silence, paddles dipping without splash. They threaded narrow canals choked with reeds, then dragged the boat over mudflats when the water ran out. Norris led from the front, waist deep in muck, hauling the bow line with his shoulders. More than once they froze in place as enemy voices drifted close. Squads of NVA soldiers patrolling the same swamp they were trying to slip through. Food was scarce, rest scarcer. They slept in short bursts, curled into the reeds, ears tuned for footsteps. The mosquitoes and leeches were constant, the humidity thick enough to choke. It wasn't glamorous work. It was a grind measured in feet and hours. Finally, after days of creeping, they reached the area where Hamilton was believed to be hiding. Finding him was like searching for a single shadow in a sea of shadows. Hamilton had been moving at night, hiding by day, constantly shifting to stay ahead of patrols. He was exhausted, starving, and nearly delirious. Worse, the jungle was alive with enemy activity. Any careless signal could bring a firefight down on both of them. The plan was painfully simple. Norris would slip in on foot, find Hamilton, and bring him back to the sampan. No radios, no signals, no backup. Just two men trying to ghost their way out of a province that wanted them both dead. Norris stripped down his gear to bare essentials: maps, a sidearm, medical supplies. With two Vietnamese commandos covering his flanks, he began the crawl. They moved inch by inch through chest-high reeds, mud sucking at their legs, every splash a possible giveaway. Hours passed like years. At last they found him. Hamilton was barely standing, gaunt from days of evasion, his face hollow and eyes burning with desperation. He recognized Norris instantly, but the relief almost broke him. His hands trembled, his voice cracked. Norris steadied him with a grip and a whisper: "We're getting you out." This was the easy part. Now came the extraction. Finding Gene Hamilton had been hard. Getting him out would be worse. The colonel was barely on his feet, starved, dehydrated, and battered from nearly 2 weeks of running and hiding. His legs shook with every step. His words came out hoarse and scattered. Norris didn't waste time with pep talks. The mission wasn't about convincing Hamilton to move. It was about dragging him through hell until he was safe. The team wrapped Hamilton in dark cloth, smearing mud over his skin to kill the shine. Norris and the commandos shouldered him between them, shifting his weight like moving a drunk friend out of a bar. But instead of neon lights and jukebox noise, their backdrop was swamp water, reeds, and the constant phantom of enemy voices. Progress was agonizing. They crawled through knee-deep mud, each pull of Hamilton's weight sinking them deeper. The sampan was waiting, hidden upriver, but between here and there were patrol boats, artillery, and soldiers who knew exactly how valuable their target was. At one point, tracer fire stitched across the night sky. Artillery thumped the ground close enough to rattle the reeds. Norris flattened Hamilton beneath him, shielding the man's body with his own while fragments sprayed mud in their faces. The commandos didn't flinch. They lived like this for years. When the barrage shifted, Norris hauled Hamilton back to his feet and pushed forward again. Disguises carried them the rest of the way. In daylight, they moved openly in the sampan. Norris and the commandos pretending to fish, while Hamilton lay under mats of reeds. Once an NVA patrol boat cut across their bow. Soldiers shouted questions. The commandos answered in casual, clipped tones, their words steady. The patrol drifted off, bored. The sampan moved on, hearts pounding under the masks of calm. The most dangerous stretch came at a river checkpoint where soldiers scanned every passing boat. Norris made the call: act normal. He sat at the stern, bamboo pole in hand, the picture of a tired fisherman. A soldier leaned into the boat, poking at the pile of mats that covered Hamilton. For a breathless moment, Norris was sure it was over. But the man grunted, pulled back, and waved them along. The sampan slid forward, every ripple in the water feeling like an earthquake. Night finally gave them cover for the last leg. Norris and two commandos carried Hamilton ashore, stumbling through brush toward the extraction point. The colonel was half-conscious, muttering fragments of words. Norris hushed him with steady squeezes on the arm. Quiet meant life. When they finally crossed into the thin edge of friendly lines, the relief didn't come in shouts or cheers. It came in silence. A crushing weight lifted from their shoulders, replaced with exhaustion so deep it hurt to breathe. Hamilton was alive, against the odds, against the bodies of drowned helicopters and dead airmen, against the province swarming with enemy troops. Norris had done it. The mission would be remembered as one of the most daring rescues of the entire war. But for Norris, in that moment, it wasn't about history or medals. It was about the simple fact that one more American had made it home because he and a handful of South Vietnamese commandos refused to quit. And Norris himself still had no illusions. He hadn't been invincible. He hadn't been untouchable. He had been lucky. Lucky and just stubborn enough to drag a half-dead colonel out of hell while the world tried to stop him. Sometimes that's all it takes. The rescue of Gene Hamilton was the kind of story that spreads fast in the military. Word of mouth first, Men talking in hushed tones about the SEAL who'd snuck into Quang Tri disguised as a fisherman and walked out carrying a kernel. Then the official channels picked it up. Reports, briefings, and eventually citations. On April 10, 1976, President Gerald Ford placed the Medal of Honor around Thomas Norris's neck. The citation called his actions supremely courageous and highlighted the way he had repeatedly risked his life in enemy territory to save others. Norris didn't see it as courage. He saw it as the job. Two men needed saving, and someone had to go in. He just happened to be the one who said yes. It was a rare distinction. Only a handful of Navy SEALs have ever received the Medal of Honor, fewer still for a mission that wasn't about killing the enemy, but about saving lives. Norris hadn't stormed a hill or led a charge. He had stalked rivers, fooled patrols, and carried a man out on his back. It was quiet work, dirty work, and it had succeeded where firepower had failed. But Norris's story didn't end with that medal. Not long after the rescue, he was back in the fight. During another mission in Vietnam, he was hit in the face by enemy fire. The wound was catastrophic, his eye destroyed, his skull fractured. He nearly died on the spot. For most men, that would have been the end. For Norris, it was just the beginning of a brutal recovery that would take years and multiple reconstructive surgeries. He survived, rebuilt, and then, because apparently he wasn't done yet, joined the FBI. For over 2 decades, Norris served as a special agent. He worked violent crime, counterterrorism, and most famously, hostage rescue. He wasn't the guy in front of the cameras. He was the quiet professional in the stack, the one teammate trusted when things got ugly. That was always the thread with Norris. Quiet, steady, and reliable. No speeches, no spotlight, just results. Hollywood noticed the Bat-21 story, the 1988 film starring Gene Hackman and Danny Glover, but the movie barely mentioned Norris. In typical fashion, his role was minimized, his heroics compressed into background noise. For Norris, it didn't matter. He wasn't chasing fame. For the SEAL community, though, it was a reminder that not every legend makes it to the silver screen. Some are too quiet for that. His fellow operators never forgot. The rescue of Hamilton and Clark became SEAL lore, an example of cunning and persistence triumphing over overwhelming odds. The kind of story instructors tell new recruits to remind them that being a SEAL isn't about muscles or bravado. It's about patience, ingenuity, and refusing to quit when quitting looks like the smart option. Even years later, Norris remained uncomfortable with the word hero. In his mind, the real credit belonged to the South Vietnamese commandos who risked everything beside him. Men who didn't get medals or headlines. Men who would have been executed if caught. Norris never stopped pointing to them as the reason the mission succeeded. And maybe that's why his legacy has lasted. Not just because of what he did, but because of how he carried it. No chest beating, no myth making, just quiet professionalism. The kind of man who gets told you can't and responds by quietly doing it anyway. In the end, that's what made Thomas Norris dangerous to his enemies and invaluable to his brothers. He wasn't a man who looked like a hero or acted like one or talked like one. He was a man, when called, simply went. And when he went, others came home. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment. And until next time, stand tall.